Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's a disaster that is closer than we think, but most people don't know about it? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A major fissure eruption in southeast Iceland. Since the Norse settlement, there have been two, the Elgja eruption of 939 CE and the Lakageiger eruption of 1783-84. Although Elgja was larger, the massive Laki eruption is better documented. It created local devastation, crop failures, poisoned grazing animals, and people. Half of all farm animals and 20% of Icelanders died. Things got so bad that the Danish government considered evacuating the entire island. We now know that the Laki plume of sulfur dioxide spread across the northern hemisphere. In the UK, it killed tens of thousands of people. Elsewhere, there were crop failures and poisonous fogs. The climate went berserk, with a series of bitterly cold winters that caused the Mississippi to freeze in New Orleans and ice flows in the Gulf of Mexico. Rain in the Nile Valley and the monsoon in India and China failed, leading to famine. Total death toll of the 18th century, anything up to 1 million people. The ocean fisheries will collapse. Yesterday's trash species are today's featured catch of the day and will be tomorrow's memory. Harvesting is occurring at unsustainable rates, while environmental degradation is steadily reducing habitat and forage ranges. For many people in developed nations, fish is one option, among many for protein. For most people in developing nations, it is the cheapest and most accessible option. When it's gone, there will be catastrophic socio-political and economic upheavals. An often overlooked disaster is the rapid decline of insects, especially pollinators such as bees. Although bee extinction is not immediate, it could have a significant impact on global food resources, ecosystems, and biodiversity. Without these pollinators, many crops would fail, leading to food shortages and economic disruption. But this important issue has not received enough attention. AMOC, Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, slowing or halting. Melting of northern latitude glaciers is effectively hosing the North Atlantic Ocean with cold fresh water, disrupting the global conveyor belt in the ocean, which redistributes heat across the planet. If AMOC slows enough, which we're looking at happening within decades, not centuries, global weather patterns will shift entirely. Western Europe will freeze, the southern hemisphere will retain more heat, sea levels will increase significantly, and the oceans will lose some of their capacity to sequester CO2, which in turn increases atmospheric warming, melting of glaciers, etc., generating a positive feedback loop. We really don't want AMOC to stop. Antibiotic resistance and the emergence not only of superbugs but pan-bug-resistant bacteria. Reports say that by the year 2050, deaths by infection caused by superbugs will be one of the leading causes of mortality. Regrettably, bacteria are evolving faster than we can develop new antibiotics, and the indiscriminate use of antibiotics in the dairy and poultry industry is only worsening the situation. Perhaps not as big as a natural disaster, but horrifying nonetheless. A solar storm. It basically occurs when the sun ejects a massive burst of solar wind and magnetic fields into space. When these reach Earth, they can interact with our planet's magnetic field, creating geomagnetic storms. One historical precedent would be the Carrigan event of 1859. It's the most famous one. It caused widespread telephone outages and even fires. At the time, electrical infrastructure was minimal. If a similar event happened today, the impact would be far greater due to our reliance on modern technology. It's likely because solar storms are a natural part of the sun's cycle, with the sun going through peaks of activity, solar maximums, roughly every 11 years. NASA and other space agencies actively monitor space weather, but the general public is largely unaware of its existence or the risks. The Carrigan event was rare, but statistically we may expect similar occurrences once every 100 to 200 years. Given the Carrington effect was around 150 years ago, we can expect another one soon. based on these facts. The global water scarcity crisis. While climate change, natural disasters, and other environmental issues are often in the spotlight, the looming shortage of fresh water resources poses a massive threat to billions of people in the near future. Why water scarcity is a major threat? Rapid population growth. As the global population increases, the demand for water grows. Agriculture, industry, and household needs all rely heavily on fresh water, and we're using it faster than it's being replenished in many regions. Overuse of groundwater. Many areas, especially in heavily agricultural or industrialized regions, are over-extracting groundwater from aquifers that take decades or centuries to recharge. This overuse can lead to water shortages, sinking ground, land subsidence, and even the collapse of local ecosystems. Climate change. Changes in rainfall patterns and increased droughts, exacerbated by global warming, are making fresh water less predictable and less available. Some regions that rely on glaciers or snowmelt for water, like parts of South Asia, could face severe shortages as these ice reserves shrink. Water pollution, industrial waste, agricultural runoff, and untreated sewage are contaminating many freshwater sources, making them unusable and unsafe without costly treatment. The growing pollution of rivers, lakes, and groundwater further shrinks the available supply of drinkable water. I think a lot of this having to do with nature comes down to a level of respect, the boundary between human and nature, and that it would appear we don't respect that boundary. Maybe in a household, maybe even in a community, but if you look at the largest providers of pollutants in the world, it's developed nations and their largest corporations. Yet they yell at us to recycle our 12 cans and laundry detergent cases, but they're dumping hundreds of thousands of pounds of plastics into our oceans. Then they're the moral right. Most people don't realize how fragile the US and I'm guessing other countries' food systems are. There are very few smaller family farms. Everything is corporate owned. If anything disrupts the distribution channels, a trucker strike, a warehouse strike, most supermarkets will be out of fresh food in 3 to 4 days. And when that starts, the panic of buying canned food will clear the rest. Not a doomsday guy, but you can fit a lot of staple foods under your bed if you don't have pantry space. Microplastics. It's being found everywhere in our environment and is already being discovered in the blood and tissue of wildlife and humans. Scientists don't even know what the long-term health effects of this will be. I'm betting on it not being good. The true disease scare is fungal infections, as they're becoming harder and harder to catch, easier to misdiagnose, and there are some fungal infections spreading right now that can live on surfaces for months, be misdiagnosed easily, and are not susceptible to most antifungal. Look up Candida auris. The big one in northern Utah. We live on or near a fault line that rarely produces earthquakes. A 5.4 with a ton of aftershock happened, so some awareness has been raised, but there's countless buildings and structures in Salt Lake County alone that will collapse in an earthquake. As far as global pandemics go, COVID was not nearly as devastating as it could have been. Keep all the aspects of COVID the same, but increased its lethality. For context, the bubonic plague killed 80% of those who became infected. If something with the same transmittability and lethality as the bubonic plague manifested today, especially now that we've seen how people respond to pandemic controls, we'd be finished. Deepfakes. You may think you can tell the difference now, but as it gets more sophisticated, you're not going to be any better at identifying it than your grandparents. What will the world be like when we can't trust anything we see or hear? What will happen when anyone can make a video of you saying anything they want or deny the terrible things they are doing by simply saying it is a seek fake of them? I sincerely believe the consequences will be the end of humanity as we know it. We will have quantum computers. When that happens, there are going to be massive implications given that it cracks modern encryption. Even if we move to encryption that is crackable by quantum computers, all the data that existed prior will be able to be unencrypted, so all the current data that governments and bad actors have squirreled away and stored, waiting to be able to mass decrypt it, will be available to them. Our carbon sink has been diminishing year after year, and it's getting to the point where we're not really filtering much of the carbon out anymore and desperately need to seek out new solutions, such as using large algae ponds and so on. No, the solution is not just planting trees everywhere. Trees are actually relatively inefficient at filtering air, And focus needs to be on things like seeding local ponds and lakes with local algae blooms and other much more efficient and easier to upkeep methods of producing large amounts of air filtering plants. Yellowstone is an actual supervolcano that has blown up every 650,000 years or so. That's why it has so many hot springs and geysers. There's effing lava underneath it. Its caldera is centered under the lake. The lake has been getting warmer, and the center has risen a little bit. If I recall correctly, it's been about 650,000 years since the last time it blew up. I don't know how likely it is in our lifetime, but the Yellowstone supervolcano will, eventually, blow. Earthquakes are rare in Boston, but if one similar to the Cape Ann earthquake in 1755 were to occur today on a much more populated north shore of Boston, the damage could be catastrophic for that area. That quake was quite possibly related to the horrible earthquake a few weeks earlier in Portugal, straight across the Atlantic. If another big one hits there, New England could be next. A prion disease outbreak. There would be little we could do besides try to quarantine everyone who's affected. If people don't show symptoms quickly, then they may not be effective. There would be no treating anyone who is affected. Destruction through cremation is about all you can do to a person. Deep in space, there are infinitely many supermassive black holes surrounded by accretion disks of matter swirling into the event horizon. That matter gets hotter as it falls, hot enough to become plasma, and emits extremely high-energy radiation. Since it swirls like a disk, most of that radiation is concentrated in the directions of the black hole's poles, creating death rays that can go almost indefinitely before dissipating. If one happened to end up pointing at Earth, it would be powerful enough to vaporize the planet in seconds, and there's nothing we could do about it. World War III. People don't realize how close we are right now. NATO literally has 800,000 troops across the border with Russia. All of Europe is currently being staged and prepped to begin massive imports of men and equipment from northern seaports to Russia's front lines. The U.S. logistics are in full swing right now, preparing for war and shaping Europe into a superhighway to support a massive war effort. North Korea is sending troops to Ukraine and cutting diplomatic ties with the South. Iran and Israel are going at it. China has been increasing its harassment and rhetoric towards Taiwan and is inching closer to supplying military aid and support to Russia. China also has a defense pact with North Korea. If war breaks out between the North and the South, and China honors its pact with North Korea, the U.S. will also then be involved to defend South Korea. Russia and North Korea also have an Article 5 type agreement. So basically, it's a Mexican standoff between all the world's biggest and most powerful countries. Once one country flinches, it's all going off. The world is a super dry tinderbox right now, and your drunk uncle is smoking next to it carelessly. The world has spent the last 50 plus years building up its military and alliances for this exact situation. By the early 2000s, the American GPS system that most of the Western world relies on had become so precise and had so much technology based on it that the Bush administration approved the dismantling of its analog equivalent, which was performed under Obama. Besides our smartphones and airplanes, things like farm equipment and even loading and unloading equipment at ports now rely on it exclusively. Russia's version of GPS is basically as advanced, but they have maintained their analog system as a backup, while simultaneously working on missiles that could cripple ours. With no analog backup, we'd be screwed if they started taking out our GPS satellites.